We'd like to go ahead and get started, please. My name is Clyde Bryant. I'm Vice President for Research at Brown, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you here to Brown and to this really great symposium that we're having on materials and their design. Before I begin a few welcoming remarks, there is something that's come to our attention that I need to just simply make a comment about. And that is that yesterday afternoon we found out that this title we had chosen for our conference, Materials by Design, which we feel is a very apt description of what we want to try to do in this meeting, is actually a registered trademark of a company, Questech Innovations, LLC. And so we were, of course, unaware of this trademark when we chose this title, but we were alerted to it yesterday. And so while I'm sure that both Questech and Brown are eager to see innovation and eager to see materials being designed with computation and so on, I do want to say that, first of all, there's in no way to imply any kind of connection between this company and this conference, and also to say that in any future communications we have about the conference where this title is used, we will certainly note that it is their registered trademark. So I just want to welcome you here today. This is a day we've been looking forward to for a number of months, and it really grew out of a conversation that I had last fall with Cyrus Wadia, who is from OSTP and is our keynote speaker. I first read some information about the Materials Genome Initiative, and when I read it, I thought, you know, this really is very close to a lot of the things we do here at Brown, particularly in mechanics of materials. We've been real leaders in trying to use computation not only to describe mechanics, but also to design new materials. And we've had a particularly fruitful collaboration with General Motors, and you'll hear about some of that later today, where the work that the two groups have done together, GM and Brown, have really spanned great length scales, all the way from the atomic up to the deformation types of mechanics that are involved in making automobiles. So when I read that, I thought, you know, this is something Brown can really contribute to, and that we really know a lot of people in this field, and we could convene something. So I was in Washington, and I met Cyrus, and we said, well, one thing that would be good would be to have a town hall meeting where we really tried to get a lot of the community together and talk about this particular topic. So as a result of that, we're here today. Now, all of this work at Brown, or most of this work, I should say, to date, and we certainly want to expand this into other fields like environment, energy, biomedical, the whole area of massive data, or big data, as it's sometimes now called. These are things we're pushing forward. But the heart of this, from where it's been developed here at Brown, has been in the School of Engineering. And so I now want to turn the podium over to Larry Larson, who is our new Dean of the School of Engineering. Larry joined us last summer, coming to us from UCSD, University of California, San Diego, and prior to that, he was at Hughes Research Laboratories. Larry, like myself, spent about half our career in industry and then moved over to academia, and so we're just delighted to have him here. And Larry, you'll be in charge of the program now. So, thanks.
Thank you, Clyde. And thank you, Clyde, for that very kind introduction. You know, we had a really wonderful speakers dinner last night, and as I listened to the conversations around the table, I was struck by the real breadth of intellectual disciplines that forms the core of material science. And we talked about chemistry, and we talked about physics, we talked about energy storage, we talked about, you know, metallurgy. And material science is really, I think, and materials are really at the heart of the modern industrial economy. And I think that theme was sort of echoed. I was at the White House last month, and was very privileged to hear kind of an impromptu talk by Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu. And I was really impressed by the breadth of topics that Secretary Chu mentioned as part of the Materials Genome Initiative, which is really one of the things that he was talking about. He talked about the importance of new developments in strong materials for a variety of manufacturing applications. He talked about the importance of semiconductor materials for power electronics for electric distribution. He talked about the importance of, you know, biomaterials for new kinds of biological applications. So it's clear that as we move our economy forward over the next decades, that materials is really going to be at the heart of all of the developments that will take us forward. So it's a real pleasure to you know, sit in on this workshop today and learn about the exciting new developments that are possible in the materials field. And you know, here at Brown, I think we're really, as Clyde mentioned, positioned very, very well to help contribute to this. We have wonderful traditional strengths in solid mechanics and computational areas around mechanics. We have great new areas of development in storage and biomaterials around injury and biomechanics. So there's a wealth of resources that we have here that we can bring to this problem, and we have great industrial relations with companies like GM and GE, Medtronic, and we have wonderful collaborative opportunities across the entire campus. One of the great strengths of Brown is its rich interdisciplinary history, so we can draw not only from our strengths in engineering, but applied mathematics, physics, and chemistry. In fact, the entire range of intellectual disciplines of the campus are available to us to help solve some of these really tough problems. So it's a great time to be engaged in this effort, and I really look forward to seeing the great things that are going to be coming out of this workshop today. And if I can help in any way as we move forward, please don't ever hesitate to let me know. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our plenary speaker for this morning's session. Cyrus Wadia. Dr. Wadia is he advises the Executive Office of the President on federal policy that accelerates innovation and deployment of advanced material systems for energy, national security, and human welfare. He's currently on leave from UC Berkeley, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and the Haas Business School. He's not only an academic, but he started companies in Silicon Valley. He was senior product manager with Avantco, and recently he's founded a boutique internet services startup specializing in complex data analysis. He's flown up here this morning from Washington to give us his view of the Materials Genome Initiative and its importance in our future technology policy. So, Cyrus.
Okay, thank you, Larry, Clyde, Tristan, the rest of the Brown University community for inviting me and arranging this trip. I'm very delighted to be here and tell you a little bit more about the Materials Genome Initiative. So first, let me start off with some context as how this relates to the broader agenda for this president and his administration. Since taking office, the president has been a very vocal proponent of out-innovating, out-educating, and out-building our competition. And advanced manufacturing and advanced materials fit squarely into that mantra. In the State of the Union in 2012, this year, the president called for an expansion of high-tech manufacturing capabilities, for the U.S. to stay on the bleeding edge of technology innovation, and for the U.S. to expand skilled employment and training opportunities for American workers. So when we conceived of this Materials Genome Initiative, we had those ideas in mind, and I do believe that this effort is really at the heart of those three elements. So let me begin by showing you this picture of the Boeing Dreamliner. Just a show of hands, how many people are familiar with this airplane? It's a 787. Most of this audience. That is fantastic. So we're definitely dealing with a pretty informed group. And I think most of you are probably aware that part of the excitement here is that this particular airplane is using 50% carbon fiber composite. So that's a very innovative step for the aerospace community. And then they have a few fun facts like electrochromatic window shades that dim at the touch of a finger. It's pretty wild. But the plane itself runs more comfortably and spacious. It's 20% more fuel efficient, and it's just kind of a cool looking plane. And so when the president visited Everett, Washington, he was struck by this advance in Boeing's own line. But how it was made is the story that hasn't come out as frequently, and I think that's actually equally interesting. So the way Boeing went about designing this, they had a global supply chain. So their supply chain actually extended into multiple countries, many different companies, small and medium-sized businesses, and they went with a virtual prototyping activity. So before a single screw was turned, they had designs and iterations on that design many times over. A change would be made to a component in Japan, and immediately, real time, that change would pop up in Everett, Washington, and Kansas, and where other part of the other supply chain was. So I bring this example to you as sort of a case study in not necessarily how a company in particular is doing things faster, but how they're innovating in the infrastructure and pervading their entire supply chain. The fact that they were able to do thousands of iterations on this airplane is very unique. Usually for a new generation airplane, 2 to 3 iterations is what I've been told is fairly standard. And in the process, they created 11,000 new jobs here in the United States, hundreds of thousands if you include the entire supply chain, and they are the #1 U.S. exporter by dollar value today. So at the risk of preaching to the converted, we really do believe that innovation in materials is critical to achieving a broad range of important national goals. And this is a quote from the president when he announced the Materials Genome Initiative last June at Carnegie Mellon University. So, whether we're talking about developing solar power as cheap as paint or a new electric vehicle that can travel 300 miles on a single charge, we have a lot of work to do, and there are many different material categories where we believe we can address some of our critical needs in national security, human health and welfare, and clean energy. So I'm going to flip through a few of these categories just to give you a sense of the breadth of the materials that we're thinking about. And this is just a snapshot. It goes well beyond this. But this is also speaking to the enormous challenge ahead of us, because the materials community is diverse. It is it's very different. But what has been consistent, for the most part, on average, and many people aren't aware of this, that it could take 10 to 20 years from discovery to market. All sorts of materials. And this is actually a slide borrowed from Garrett Sater at MIT, who's here with us today. And he talks about Teflon, Velcro, gas, lithium-ion batteries. You get a sense that this is a remarkably long process, and it's not just the discovery process. The discovery actually happens quite fast. It's everything that happens after the discovery to get those materials to market. So let me introduce what we're calling a linear continuum to this conversation. And I flip it on its side because the image that we have typically is very small for you to see. And I blow up the words, so discovery, development, many different categories. Everybody in this room might have their own version of this. It's not to say that this is sort of the continuum, but the point we're trying to make is that there are many steps along the way, and it's a very linear process. And it's necessarily linear because at every step along the way, there's an introduction of new technical risk or financial risk. To move a material out of the lab into the market is a very time-consuming process. But part of that problem is that we have to tailor those materials that are developed in the lab. So labs here at Brown University are working on some very interesting materials. But to take those materials out, there has to be a tailoring process. And that tailoring process is highly empirical today. It requires multiple iterations. And what complicates it, too, is that every material has this unique set of mechanical and electrical and structural properties, all of which need to be optimized. So if you're an engineer trying to bring these materials out, you might knock one property down and something else pops up that you didn't expect because these are non-correlated properties. So I hope I'm trying to paint a picture that when we go through this process, it's highly linear and it's necessarily linear today, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I also think about this in terms of a funnel. So last point I'm going to make on this slide is that we have a lot of discovered materials. In fact, there are many materials out there that are laying dormant because of this problem that I've described. And so as you funnel down, right now the funnel is really narrow from the discovery to the actual next step, to the development of the material, because when we look at the information available, it's very, it's very difficult for a company or a startup to make good decisions based on the material properties and the information available for all of those materials that we're discovering. So we continue to discover more and more, and we want to advance that side of the equation, but I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about what happens after the discovery. So our tagline, twice as fast, half the cost. And this is sort of our mantra. Very, very difficult to actually track this. So we're going to have this great initiative, and in 5-10 years, we're hoping to showcase some success. We're going to be developing over the course of the next year some more concrete milestones that speak to the various parts of the initiative. But this is the overall vision. And We view this as a stretch goal, but it's one that the community has said that they're excited to get behind. But first, let me talk about a few barriers. So the risks I described earlier could be mitigated when you couple experimental and computational analysis. But these tools today are severely lacking at every point along the continuum, and we're going to talk more about that. The second is that the community itself is somewhat fragmented because you have all these different material categories and classes. It's a bit siloed, and in many cases it's overly proprietary. And this works against sort of the development of more collaborative tools and infrastructure that I described. So we could compress it through the advances in computation and data informatics. But there's this other piece, which is on the actual culture of the materials community, which is equally important. Today, there really haven't been that many incentives to form these tighter collaborations, and the infrastructure, like I said, is severely lacking. So this Materials Genome Initiative is truly a movement. It's a movement that is one part infrastructure and one part culture. And to some degree, it stretches beyond just the U.S. as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So our strategy, there are really sort of three key points I want to make. One is we're taking a decentralized approach. So we're not looking at a monolithic movement where we try to build something and pull everybody under it. We're doing it in the complete opposite way. We believe that because of this fragmented issue, we have an opportunity to seed different activity, at Brown, at companies in California. We look at the entire spectrum and we say, we just want this whole concept to advance, and how can we do that sort of at the smallest scale and up to as large a scale as makes sense. We want to accommodate both discovery and taking previously discovered materials and getting them out there. Like I said, there may be a lot of advances that are already developed to solve some of these issues that we care about, but they're just laying dormant, and we want to fix that. And then the last is we want to encourage an integrated approach to the full continuum. And a lot of folks in here are familiar with the phrase ICME, Integrated Computational Materials Engineering, ICMSE. These are acronyms for an approach where you consider the process by which you develop a material at step one. And this is a way that you can wrap this linear continuum around itself and actually change how we're doing our business. So our tactics are to compress this time are in data and computation and this integrated approach. And what I share with you here, just at a high level, is a list of 4 key themes that is going to sound very jargony, because it is jargony, but these are sort of the guiding principles of the federal government on the materials genome right now. So when we look at what we're doing, we hope that they fall into one of these 4: incentivizing open paradigms of access and sharing of tools, facilitating the development of innovative ecosystems. So when you think about the Boeing supply chain, it was Boeing and hundreds of small, medium-sized businesses, and we consider that stretching all the way into universities and national labs. The third is innovative techniques across computation, informatics, and experimentation. No one of these is left out. We are going to focus heavily on the intersection, but look at each one in particular and find ways that we can improve our performance. And then the fourth is this shift in culture, which also includes, consequently, education. And so we think a lot about workforce development. We want to encourage universities like Brown University to be very proactive in trying to introduce new elements to their curriculum so that we can start to see in future generations these types of principles taking hold. So like I said, currently there's no infrastructure truly that exists across this continuum, and this is our description of the initiative. In the center, we have the 3 components of the infrastructure: computation, experimentation, and data. On the outside, we're focusing this effort around materials that address human welfare, clean energy, and national security. And another outcome of this, as I just mentioned, is on the next generation workforce. So if you look at, I'll just kind of say a few words on each of these bubbles. So computation. So right now, we don't use computation quite as much as we could. And part of the reason is that the potential is there, but in reality, these models have not been mature enough for the community to embrace them and incorporate them into their process. So if you're crash testing cars, you still crash test cars. If you're discovering new materials in a lab, you're still doing it very empirically. But slowly, we're at a point in time where these models have gotten to a level of maturity where we think we're at the cusp of bringing them into this process and using the experimental capabilities to begin validating the models. But we have to get better. So the predictive capabilities are still not where they need to be. We need to do better, and that's part of this effort. The second bubble on experimental tools, there are going to be new techniques that develop, analytic techniques, at the atomic or nanoscale, as well as at the macro scale, when you think about sensing technology that you could do in a manufacturing line. You know, one example is that we have sort of these advances in nanotechnology, but when we manufacture at scale, we don't have the ability yet to identify properties at that level during the manufacturing process. And that's a problem, because I don't think we're fully able to take advantage of all these great innovations that have been made. But the third bubble is on data, and really this becomes the linchpin to this entire effort. And you know, we always say data transparency encourages innovation, it encourages cross and multidisciplinary activity, and there's no real set pathway here. I'll say that from the outset. We are actually very active in soliciting from the community how this should look. Again, I think this part will follow the distributed, decentralized approach, but there has to be some common level of protocol or standardization, and we're looking into that issue. And in fact, in May, the NIST is going to be leading a workshop in Washington that I hope many of you will be able to attend, because we're going to bring the community together to start asking and addressing some of these difficult questions around intellectual property and access to data. And then lastly, the success of this initiative cannot be measured by the tools alone, but rather on the pervasiveness of their use. And so this is why we're also focused on a next generation workforce. So let me bring the linear continuum back in, and in a very clumsy way try to say a point. This slide is very confusing even to me still, and I promise you by the next time you hear my talk, I will probably have a better version of this. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the infrastructure I'm describing is not just on one slice on discovery or deployment. There are going to be unique aspects and attributes to this infrastructure across every spot. So we can continue to think about this linear continuum and develop tools along the way. But across this backbone, we also need a better method and platform for information and knowledge transfer. And so there are a lot of iterations that are going to happen between the steps. So you'll see sort of this three-dimensional view of infrastructure. But today, this is really how things look. And if you start integrating those pieces of the infrastructure and our knowledge bases and introduce these data informatics tools, we believe that we can achieve more materials to market faster, and maybe the continuum will look a little bit more like this. So in achieving the vision, I'm going to first talk about some accomplishments to date, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do for the next 9 to 12 months. First, we put some programs in place in fiscal year 12, and by my count, we're probably now at 6 or 7, and these range. So NSF did an open Dear Colleague letter. Maybe some of you were involved in that. The DOE did a solicitation for computation. And what was exciting about that is they were looking specifically at some centers for computation, but also they call them glue grants. And these are grants that will bring disparate communities together. And the government provides the overhead and the glue money to bring these folks together, create the collaboration, get that process started. We've also seen out of AFRL and ONR and the DOE what we call foundational engineering problems. Most recently, there's a lightweighting material problem that the DOE announced for vehicles. So looking at new computational tools for different materials that would address lightweighting of automobiles. Leverage on existing federal programs. So in addition to this modest amount of federal resource that we're putting through in 12 and then subsequently in 13, we really think there's an opportunity to get more leverage out of other federal activities. So if you look across the entire federal spectrum, there's plenty of research that's happening, R&D spend on materials, and how we begin leveraging those is one area that we're looking at. Maybe it's simply just beginning to introduce components of the materials genome one step at a time. Maybe there's something more deliberate on data that we can do with this broader community. The interagency coordination, it is quite important. I will tell you this, some of the folks are here today. I see Julie in the audience. We have a very active interagency group, and this is DOE, NSF, NIST, DOD. We're now expanding it to EPA, USGS, NASA. It's going to continue to grow. And what I've noticed in my short time in Washington is that these processes actually do make a difference. So the better coordinated you are, the more, I guess I'd use leverage again, leverage you can get out of the federal activity. And so we have a sort of a well-tuned machine right now, and I'm very proud of this group. We've managed to get a lot done. We have a lot ahead of us. But establishing this interagency process is important to me because you can't predict the political cycles, and we want this initiative to really have a long life. And so getting this grounded is was one of our key priorities, and I think we got that done. External stakeholder commitments. So we're constantly in conversation with folks like Brown, GM, and others, and we're trying to get other stakeholders, universities and industry, to make commitments of their own, not necessarily connected to specific federal resources. And I'll give you one example. University of Connecticut, in partnership with the state of Connecticut, is developing a $170 million technology park. And this technology park is in the sort of overall view of advanced materials and manufacturing. And they came to us and they said, hey, we're about to announce this. Could we announce this in the spirit of the materials genome? And so, separate activity, but we're starting to see how activity outside of the federal government is growing. There are many, many other examples. So the last point I'd make is we're constantly looking for partners. And part of my reason for being here today is to recruit all of you to be ambassadors to this initiative, but also to take it one more step. And we're looking to talk to universities, NGOs, professional societies across the board and think about how they can begin sort of convening their own communities in this broader materials community and driving some of our ideas forward. Because again, really, this is a movement, and it is in the best interest of this broad materials community to see this through. But again, in a decentralized approach, we have to depend on a lot of leadership from outside of the federal government. And I think that's in everybody's best interest, quite honestly. So in achieving the vision, we're also looking forward. And I mentioned some of these roadmaps, for milestones, new policies, R&D activity that we're planning in the next year. We are constantly convening stakeholders. We're looking at industry-initiated commitments. Several of us were in Orlando, Florida 2 weeks ago, talking to 50 executives that had an interest in this. And we came out of that meeting where the executives signed up to some core principles that they were willing to take back home into their companies and begin the process of trying to develop programs of their own. It's very exciting. University-initiated commitments, and we're also talking to the publishing community, trying to understand how we can leverage the publishing community to advance some of our ideas, particularly on data, not necessarily on the open access, that's a much harder conversation, but on just the presentation of data and making raw data available in these types of academic publications. So, I guess I'll just close by giving you my call to action and thanking you for your willingness to participate and be involved. I know that this community has been forward-thinking in this area. I'm excited to see what the engineering department here comes up with over the next few years. I'm really excited to hear talks throughout the day, especially understanding a bit more about how Brown and GM were able to leverage some of these ideas towards problem solving. These are some generic guidelines of how individuals can come to the table, but identifying something specific, shared principles that might guide collaboration. This might be between a company and a university. It might be between a full community of materials, like the lightweighting community. Who knows? There's no scale here that really is a sort of a lower threshold. Any scale is relevant. Materials grand challenges. We think about grand challenges a lot in the White House, and so one of the areas that we're interested in is looking at new grand challenge problems that may be material related, that the community at large would be excited to get behind. And then this one is the idea of pre-competitive sharing of data and infrastructure. This is one we'd like to see happen organically. And folks at MIT and LBNL have put out, with Gerd, who's here today, have put out a database on battery materials, lithium-ion based battery materials, and made it openly available to the community. And so we're starting to dabble in this area, that here's some information, we're going to put it out, and over time we're going to understand best how companies and universities and national labs all interact. But we need to do more of this. And I think there are many, many opportunities to get this done, even in a private way. So again, if you can imagine a GM Brown collaboration, there's clearly some data exchange there, and that can happen in a private way. The entire Boeing supply chain, data information. So, and then lastly, my objective being here is also to get feedback from you. I know you have thought about this problem far longer than some of us in the federal government, especially me, and I'd like to get your feedback. We're always open to suggestions and ideas, and we want you to help us shape this initiative to make it stronger and successful. So, I think with that, I'll close my remarks and open it up for questions.
Cyrus, thank you so much. Thank you. We have time for some questions. Any questions from the audience? Alan.
You mentioned international collaboration. Can you give examples of sister agencies abroad that might be involved in this process?
Yeah, so this is an area that we're just beginning to explore, but we've kind of gone into this. The subtitle of the initiative is competitiveness, so it sort of connotates, maybe this is sort of inward looking, but we'd be remiss not to take advantage of the fact that some of the computational capabilities are even more advanced in Europe, and that we need to bring in a broader community of these market players to actually achieve our goals. And so we're exploring that issue, and what we're trying to plan in conjunction with this workshop is a roundtable at the White House with leaders from the various research institutes across the country in Europe to have this conversation, because they just will happen to be in town for meeting with NSF, its Director Subra Suresh. So we're going to try to piggyback on that and begin the dialogue. But we don't have a clear pathway for what that looks like yet.
I wonder if you consider the importance of the intellectual property system in the scheme of things here. We find that the private industry, the current system, very inefficient, very expensive. The rules very confusing. The patent office right now takes sometimes three years to consider the patent applications. The issued patents cannot be relied on as that they will be upheld in court. And in the end, we pay a tremendous amount of money for things that in the end are not worth it. So I really believe that the part of that initiative would be streamlining the process, make the USPTO work more efficiently. Part of it is the share of funds that we pay to the patent office that go somewhere else. I'd just like to signal that.
No, I think it's an important point. And, we're taking this issue of intellectual property very seriously. Like I said, we're announcing this workshop in May, and I believe this will be a very important part of the discussion. We've taken some steps through other efforts. For example, Startup America is one that's trying to empower entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized businesses, and it's a presidential initiative that was announced last year. And there are some fast-tracking for patents for young entrepreneurs and small, medium-sized businesses in certain categories. So we're testing the water, seeing if we can start doing this more effectively. Maybe it's a resource question. It's probably, in many ways, a process question. And, you know, we don't, I think I take your point, because to litigate through these intellectual property concerns can be costly and time-consuming and just not worth it. So we're taking it seriously. We're going to try to address this. And our hope is that we can achieve a lot of these goals of openness with some scheme in mind of how the intellectual property will be considered. We had a letter of support co-signed by 11 professional societies that represented roughly 700,000 individuals in the community. And it was materials heavy, MRS, TMS, but you also had APS there, ACS, and so there is a broader community that's paying attention and interested in engaging. And you know, we're trying to develop a coalition of the willing. So if there are some that are going to take a more proactive role, ASM, TMS, MRS today, those are materials focused. But over time, we hope that other professional societies can take their lead. And so we'll constantly be looking to engage with them. Again.
Other questions? How do you see the role of national laboratories, which are a tremendous resource in the initiative? Is it only a fundamental role, materials discovery, developing new methodologies, or do you see their role also going into the next stages of development, like process development, engineering, and then don't they compete, or wouldn't they compete with the national laboratories, with private initiative, private industry, basically, if they go into semi-commercial type of problems and issues?
Well, it's a hard question for me to address, because I think the role of the national labs is quite important in this effort, and I think their role will be defined by their mission. You know, I come from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which would look quite different than other national labs in this ecosystem that you're describing. So I couldn't quite address sort of a national lab question broadly, but I would say that we do have to come up with ideas and ways for the national labs and industry to participate together. In the area of clean energy, we've already taken that step, and Secretary Chu has been a very vocal proponent of getting better leverage out of the national labs, having industry getting better leverage out of the national labs for clean energy applications. And they started convening groups, having summits, workshops much like this to explore the issue. So I know it's on their mind, and it's on my mind as well. I don't know the outcome of those meetings, but we're exploring the ideas that are out there.
One more question.
How do you judge at the end whether this initiative is successful or not?
Yeah.
Or not you want to make that judgment?
So that's a great question and a good point to close on. Now, like I said, our mantra is twice as fast, twice as cheap. But it's very hard to track, and it's not really a milestone that the federal government is easily can quantify, because this is the community and we're trying to help the entire community. So I think the way I would see it is we would judge success based on intermediary steps, and maybe in 5 years, if there are examples out in the industry where publicly available infrastructure accelerated the development and deployment of a new material, those are the kind of stories we're going to look for. Now, as we distill this down into these milestones, I think we'll have a better answer for you, because then there will be specific metrics that we will be trying to track. So maybe it's 50 open access data centers. Kind of inventing that out of thin air. But if that was a metric that we cared about because we believed it fed the higher level goal, then we would be aggressively pursuing that. What I hope will happen is also a coalescence in the materials community around some of these themes, so that it becomes more of a movement. The way I would probably view success in a 10-year period is to look back and say that the federal government played a 10% role in all of this. And actually, it was the community and the resources from the community that drove this forward. And all the thought leadership still must come from the community. So that's kind of how I would look at it.
Let's thank Cyrus again for that inspiring talk.
Okay, thank you.
So much.